All right. So thank you, Mark, for joining the
Oh,
internal
thank you.
communication series that I run on my blog. And as you know, it's been around since 2006. And I talk to thought leaders on their perspectives on internal communication. This episode is special because you are the expert on culture. And I think there's a huge correlation between how communication and
Yeah.
culture work. So I wanted to ask you a few questions to begin with. You've been in this domain, you worked on culture. So what's really, according to you, over the years, what has really changed about culture, and how do companies see it?
Most interesting is how little has changed.
Okay.
Culture's an outcome. Culture is ultimately how it feels to
Right.
work somewhere, and so that hasn't changed. What
Mm.
certainly has changed are the things that can influence culture, can get in
Right.
the way of culture. I think the role of leadership to help shape behavior has become more intensified. But I don't think culture itself has changed at all. It was 42 years ago when I wrote my thesis in graduate school on culture and how leaders of companies influenced what we then called the work environment or the work experience. We didn't use the word culture as much. And it really hasn't changed. Our role has not changed as communicators. What
Mm.
has changed is all the noise,
Mm.
certainly some of the pressure, and perhaps some of the institutional trust that can get in the way of cultures that both please people, inspire people, and become
Right.
famous.
Fantastic. So what according to you is the key role that communication plays in terms of culture building?
Well, I think that there are a few things. I think we have always and we continue to provide a help provide a sense of clarity about what's happening in an organization, to make certain that everyone is operating from a unified sense of purpose and mission and strategy and concern about results. So I think clarity has always been a key part of what we do. I think
Right.
certainly, and I think this has become even more the case in with the use of technology where we can pull information. I think a key part of our job is to stimulate the curiosity. uh,
Mm.
we're not the news bureau. We're not cub reporters. I
Right.
think we are those who we want to stimulate the curiosity, and so that people will want to learn more on their own about the places they work and the industries they work in. So I think that curiosity is a key part. I think more so today, because it's more important today, we're the ones who facilitate conversations. uh,
Right.
and I think that's probably the most important thing that we do, is we need to be, in charge of how organizations listen and what
Mm.
organizations do with what they hear. So I think that facilitating the conversation's key so that people can make connection. And then I think that ultimately the impact we have is on a sense of commitment that people bring to their work and to the organizations, to each other, and the contributions they make.
Mm.
Uh, the most important thing we do is we give organizations confidence.
Mm.
And I think that especially when you look back at this year and all the things that we hold on to that we can't hold on to, the people we want to hold on to, we can't hold on to. And I think it has done so much, what's happened in the world, to dilute the confidence we have in the places we live and the people we follow. And I think that the key thing we should be worrying about every day as communicators or anyone focused on culture is how confident are people in the
Mm.
experience of working here day to day, year to year, career to career.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I like the part about listening and being really close to what the organization is about.
Yeah.
So in relation to that, I mean, now that we're going through COVID, so what is your sense of how should organizations approach thinking about culture in this kind of a scenario post-COVID?
I think we need to listen and we need to ask people, how are you doing and how have you
Mm.
been doing. We look back at we had to change overnight. One
Mm.
day we went to an office, the next day we didn't go to an office without any idea of if we would ever return to that office.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I think we as organizations have to say, as virtual as we thought we were,
Mm.
culture was primarily a brick and mortar experience because it happens immediately around me. And if
Right.
those things I counted on immediately around me are no longer there, or now I'm having to share them with, a partner in life, with children, with all the people who need to use the internet, with all of
Yes.
these changes, all of a sudden those culture icons that we can rely on when we all
Mm.
go somewhere every day are no
Mm.
longer there. And so I think we have to ask, this is the most important time to listen. If we
Mm.
weren't listening during, we need to certainly be listening at this point as
Mm.
hopefully the world comes out of this. But we need to learn how this changed us so that
Mm.
we don't instantly expect at some magic point to say, okay, that's over. We can go back to the way we were, because we
Mm.
can't. We won't. And I think the key reason is because we learned a lot. We've learned a lot from this. We've learned that, my goodness, I can do my job. I can be a good parent. I can be a student. I can be a husband, a wife, a partner, and I can do all these things. I didn't realize how much I can really accomplish. And
Mm.
when I go back to work, I'm going to go back to work, or the physical work, if you will, if I ever go back to physical work, with a
Right.
greater sense of competence in what I can accomplish. And that's a powerful thing. And organizations need to be aware of it, be sensitive to it, be responsive to it. We
Mm.
can't go back to what things were like in January of 2020. That world's gone.
Mm. Very interesting. And in a recent study among employees, they found that employees felt much more supportive, and there was a lot more kindness
Yeah.
demonstrated by organizations. Now, what's the correlation and what's the connection to culture in this?
Well, as we've talked about in different conversations, and certainly have tried to bring to the places we work, culture is 99% all about leadership.
Mm.
If you think about what's happened in our world, what is
Mm.
really important for us to feel as people? Well, we need to feel that leaders are in charge. It's nice to think that leaders may have a plan, may
Mm.
have a strategy, may actually know how to facilitate conversations themselves. But
Right.
most important, we want to know that leaders care.
Mm.
And I think that going forward, when we look at those things that determine if I'm willing to follow a leader, I'm going to be
Mm.
looking a whole lot more closely if he or she cares for people, and
Yeah.
if he or she makes certain that the people they work with every day care for people. I think the care quotient is going to be a whole lot more on our minds as we move forward, simply
Mm.
because this experience has left us feeling so vulnerable.
Mm. Interesting. That's a great point about the care quotient. Now, what is your recommendation for leaders and managers to communicate culture? Because it's hard to just talk about culture, but how do you communicate it?
You don't use the word. I've said this for years. If we can talk about it, it can be our code word for doing the
Mm.
right thing. It can be our code word for showing people that we care. It can be our code word for listening. But the minute we start talking too much about culture as a thing, it becomes a thing that we can check the box and say, we're done, we succeeded, we can move forward. You
Mm.
can't ever check the box and think you're done, because tomorrow you'll have different people, tomorrow you'll have different challenges, tomorrow
Mm.
you will have different pressures. And so I think the best way to talk about culture is to do what is right, and
Mm.
then trust that people will choose, and with those choices create a culture where they want to work. Ultimately, leaders
Mm.
don't change culture. Leaders can change themselves. They can
Right.
shape themselves, and people will follow. And so best way to think about culture is to think about it, not to use the word too much.
Mm. Right. And if I would ask you, what can organizations do to be culture ready for the future? I mean, if that's us, is there a statement like that? Is there something they can do?
Have the listening systems in place. The most important thing to do is to just feel that you have this ongoing sense of dialogue with your people, so that
Mm.
you can immediately project what you're hearing to what's happening in the organization. You know, the best thing we can bring to any conversation is for people to ask us, well, how do you think people will react to that? And we don't have to rely on our instinct. We can actually reach for the insight that we've collected from our people. And so listen, and catalog and curate it and communicate it. But that ability to be able to instantly project how our people may react is not as valuable as anything we can bring.
And as we wrap up, Mark, what has been the hardest step for you? When, I mean, all these years you worked in, managing, curating culture. What has been the hardest step for you?
Telling people no, or telling people it's not over yet, or telling people. I think sometimes we believe the press about what culture is. I think there are always going to be people who think it's this program or that program or this gimmick, or if we wash our dogs at work. Those things are great window dressing, but it's all about what's happening inside. And it's all about, again, how people feel. And it is essential that we realize that it's complex, that it's fragile, and that it has to be fed, nurtured, supported every day.
Brilliant. This is great, Mark. Thank you so much for taking time to do this.
Thank you.
Okay, 1 second.